Waters break. Coming up next, right here on The Right Stuff. Hi, and welcome to The Right Stuff. I'm the Queen, Parker J. Thank you so much for joining me. Today, we're going to be talking to my guest co-host and contributor today, Sophia Henson. She is the author of this wonderful story called Waters Break. I got to tell you, dear listener, this story is so very good. I can't wait to tell you about it in just a few moments. As always, I want to thank our Patreon team for their support. We have been showcasing Christian authors worldwide for 10 years. As God gives us grace, we'll continue to do so. To find out how you can help out, simply go to patreon.com/rightstuff. To stay up to date with PJC Media, go to pjcmedia.net. Click on that pink follow button. You'll never miss a show. Subscribe to our YouTube channel for updates, uploads, and more. Go ahead, subscribe today. Lastly, I want to thank you all for your support of my newest release, The Redemption Bride. Your response has been phenomenal. If you haven't had a chance, go ahead and pick up your copy exclusively on Amazon.com. And so, without further ado, I'm going to bring Sophia on board. Sophia, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. How about you?
I am doing fine. Thank you for being here with me today. I have been looking forward to this conversation.
Me too.
Now, dear listener, I have to tell you, I met Sophia in person at Railmakers last year. We were in St. Louis. And what was so interesting is that my room wasn't ready. No one's rooms were ready. And so we sat there for hours in the hotel lobby getting to know one another. We could have all gone outside, but St. Louis was hot and we were all going to melt if we walked outside. So we froze to death in the hotel lobby in St. Louis. So that's how Sophia and I met. And then she talked about this story. And when she talked about this story, I was so like, okay, I can't wait to read it. But when I got a chance to read it, let me tell you, oh, it is so good, dear listener. I can't wait to just dig into it. But as always, I want to get behind the scenes with my good friend here. So Sophia, go ahead, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, well, I am older than the average young adult writer. I am now. I had 7 kids and I have 1 grandchild, and I have a mom that's Korean, and I have lived in Alaska, New York, Boston, Tennessee, and now I live in Alabama. So I've been around a little bit.
What is Alaska like? I've always wondered.
I only lived there till I was 7, so my memories of there are of that of a young child. And I remember that we had a little house, and the road was Halibut Road, and across the street was a hill that went down to Swan Lake. You can't make this up. And in the winter, we would slide down that hill right onto the lake, and that was fun. I lived on an island, Sitka, and it only had, at that time, about 12 miles of highway. It was teeny tiny. And my dad worked at the pulp mill there, and it was nice. It was a nice little place. And then God decided that we needed to move to New York, and everything got hard after that. But it was part of his plan and his goodness.
Oh, my goodness, you said pulp, and then you say 12 miles of highway. That just seems like another world from my urban world, because I'm definitely a city girl, but I like the fact you could tell me about that. And so you moved all over the place doing different things, I'm sure. During that time, as you were moving and learning about different parts of the world that you lived in, were you a writer then? Did you always have this writing bug within you?
A little bit, I think. I've always loved poetry. I've found little scraps of notebooks where I've written poems in the 3rd grade. I remember in elementary and junior high and high school, I would always ask my teachers if I could substitute a poem for an essay. And sometimes they said yes. And
then sometimes they said no.
Yes. But I've always loved poetry and fairy tales and stuff. And then when I was in high school, my mom was writing her autobiography. And since my mom is Korean, English is not her first language. And so I would edit that book over and over and over again. So I've been an editor since the 80s. Actually, since the 70s. Uh, and I just would, always edit and edit and edit. And I think I got my chops for picking the right word at that point.
Are you fluent in Korean?
Oh, gosh, no. I could say, I love you, grandma, thank you, and maybe order food.
I know. 안녕하세요.
Yes, that's hello.
I know. Yeah. From all
Okay.
the dramas. I think I know 고맙습니다, depending on the level of formality you want.
Right.
Also, chawal, something like that.
I don't
think
know.
I just mutilated that. I think
I don't know it. So
yeah, I know Japanese better because I took Japanese when I was in high school, and I took for 4 years. And you watch anime, you pick up on it still. And I haven't watched anime in a while, but I was looking at something the other day, and everything I remembered about Japanese started to come back to me because you do start to pick it back up again once you listen to it. And I think I know ha, which is like come or go. I think it's one of those, one or the other. So yeah. So you have this rich backstory with your own childhood and moving around and writing. And when did that translate into I'm going to write my first story?
that didn't happen for a very long time. In 2008, I was actually I started having kids in 1990. And my joke is that I was pregnant and or nursing for all of the 90s.
Oh my gosh.
So I had 5 kids within that decade. The challenge is my kids didn't nursery well. And so the activities that I could attend were limited. Most places, especially in the 90s, weren't very comfortable with nursing children or little children. And I didn't want to force them to be in a situation where they were really upset. I mean, I know I could have trained them for that, but I was also homeschooling when they got old enough for that. And so I didn't have it required that they learn to get over being separated from me. So I maybe I coddled them, whatever. I was way more into attachment parenting than anything else. And it had been such a long time since I'd actually been able to participate in retreats or Bible studies or even sit through a whole service. My husband and I would take turns in the playground. And then in 2008, a dear friend, Angela, held a Bible study at her house. And it was a Beth Moore study. I remember it was God's tabernacle, a woman's heart is God's tabernacle or something. It was a study about the tabernacle. And she said, you can bring anybody you want, bring all the kids, they'll all play outside. You can bring the baby in with you. And it was just for the first time since I started having kids, my soul was being fed. So you think 90, I had a kid, and this was 2008.
Wow.
That was a long time to not be able to participate in any kind of group activity. And so my soul was fed, and I just started writing. It just like something broke free, some kind of creativity that I hadn't actually had a chance to even think about. And then a couple of years, about that time, my pastor's wife had invited me to write something. She asked me to write something. I got an assignment. I haven't had assigned writing since I was in college. And she assigned me to write something for their Christmas program. And I said, why would you ask me? Because I was just the lady with the kids hanging all over her. I mean, literally, when we joined the church, they didn't have a kids program, and they started one for us, for my older kids. And I asked her, and she said, because you love words. I hadn't even realized that, but it was true. And that just spoke something into my heart. And so I just started writing, and I started a little blog called From the HOV Lane, because high occupancy vehicle was my name.
I love it. I love the fact that the Lord used during all that time, he was preparing you to do this. And I think that's really interesting that someone understood how much you love words. And that really shows up in Water's Break. That really does show up, your love of words and your love of creating pictures with these words. Because, dear listener, and this is not a spoiler, as a matter of fact, it starts off right away about the deep. And one thing I loved about this story is that our main character, Nica, she is from this world where they all live underwater. They all live in the deep, and it's broken up a little bit by islands or small patches of ground, but it's mostly just water. Kind of like Waterworld, but better. So with this world, when we first start off with this story, it's so rich and imaginative. And Nica is hiding. She's hiding actually because she doesn't want to be bothered with weddings. And again, this is the first chapter. Her sister's getting married and her sister wants to be part of the entourage and she doesn't want to be part of it. But what was interesting is that Nica is so comfortable in her world. And when she was hiding from her sister, she's hiding in a forest of kelp. And I've seen those kelp forests. They're absolutely stunning and beautiful. And then when I was imagining this world largely of water and how massive the kelp forest would look, that image just grew and grew. Just the visual just grew and grew. And they used the kelp as part of their society. They use it to help identify each other based off of ranking. They use it to celebrate. They use it for everything. It's not a major part of the story, but just as someone who really appreciates when an author can orient the reader so well that you can visualize this world, I have to give special mention to that. And so you did a really good job putting us in the world of the deep. And what was so interesting too is that there's a poem at the beginning of the story. It's not even a poem, it's more so like a lamentation. And the lamentation says, "In the beginning was the deep. The deep was whole and covered all. The deep was whole and supported all. In the deep was life and peace. The deep was complete. We loved and lived in the deep, giving and receiving, sharing space, sharing life, inhabiting the shallows and the depths, loving the surface light and the colder climes. We were farmers, teachers, and explorers, but more than anything, we were lovers, knowing and being known, without fear, without hesitation. We dwelt in communion until the water broke." And it's so sad because that water breaking, which is alluding to the title, doesn't begin to show exactly what happens when the water breaks. And it was after I read this story that I understood why you even titled the book Water's Break. Because when you think about water that has not been disturbed, it's like a clear surface. And then all of a sudden something comes and shatters the surface. So we'll get into that. Now, the genesis of the story had to come from what?
I'm sorry. What do you mean?
Where did the story idea come from? This particular story idea.
Okay. I'd been walking with my kids. We used to live in Franklin, Tennessee, and we had this little road behind our house. And we'd take walks there, and my mom would come. And I had five kids, a decade apart. And there was a little creek that followed the road we'd walk. And it was crumbling asphalt, and I would always get a little nervous when the kids would get close to the edge. But they're kids, and so they're going to want to go close to the edge. And I'd be on high alert. And then, I don't know, my mind just started going, what if they fell in and they discovered they could breathe? What if it was actually panicking in fear that caused problems rather than just peacefully accepting that change? And so that was the first genesis of this world. And then I got a bunch of no's. I mean, I actually developed this thought, worked on it for NaNoWriMo, went and pitched it at my first conference in 2017, and I was told, that's no good. No, not a good villain, not a good conflict. You've got a nice setting, but nothing else. And I was heartbroken. But that person was right. And so it took a couple months, but I got myself back together and I started to revisit it. And I decided to back up, and I back engineered a world where this might happen, where people had forgotten that they could breathe the water. And so that's how this world came to be.
It's a fascinating story, and we follow our main protagonist. Now, before I do that, I have to give a shout out to Kirk DePonce. He's the one who created this cover. Oh my goodness. Kirk DePonce is already really good, but he really went above and beyond with this, wouldn't you say?
Beautiful. Oh, and he captured everything that I wanted him to capture. He captured Nica. She's got legs. I needed legs in there so people wouldn't think it was another mermaid. I love mermaid stories, but this isn't one of them. Captured the beauty and the turmoil of that instance. He just captured everything, and it just made my heart sing.
When I saw the cover, I said, this is a kick-A cover. I was just like, my goodness. And I'm looking at the cover, I'm like, what's her story? That's one of the first things you think of when you see this. And then you see in the the background, you see what looks like whales or dolphins. I forgot what they call them in the world, but dolphins behind her. Then you see what looks like rockets behind her. And that's all you see, but it's such an intriguing cover. So we have to give a shout out to Kirk DePonce for his work. And I'm actually going to link his website in the show description. So if anyone's looking for cover or illustration design, you should definitely consider using Kirk DePonce. And actually, he's going to do a cover for me too.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, he's going to do one. I'm doing a secret project that's going to take a couple of years to complete. And I told him about it. He was like, oh, okay. Well, let me know when you're done. So, because he really does capture the imagination, and I love it. So, yeah. So we got this story. And so what happens is that her life until this moment is, I don't want to be my sister's wedding. That's what her life is. I don't want to be my sister's wedding. I just want to chill, do my thing. I want to be a guardian. And a guardian is someone who protects their section of the deep or their place of the deep. And then what happens, Sophia?
Oh, and then all of a sudden the daylight seems to be clouded over, and she goes up to investigate, and she sees what looks to her shapes like orcas just slamming into the water's surface, but they're not alive. They're just these huge rocks, shiny black rocks that just descend, and then she discovers that they're generating heat as they go down, and then there are explosions down at the not at the surface, at the ground level of the ocean. And she doesn't know what's happening. All she knows is that there's some kind of disaster, and she loses consciousness. And when she comes to, everything has been leveled. These people lived in the caverns. They enhanced them, but everything that they've built and added to, and even the natural structures, have been devastated, and these volcanoes have been set off, and so there's danger and panic everywhere.
Another thing that happens too is that in this story, her perceptions are really grounded by her life in the deep. So when she talks, and this happens all throughout the story, which I thought was quite clever, she's talking as someone who lives and breathes and lives in the water. And so she'll say something like, a new tide. The next tide will come over. Or she says, don't be a minnow. Or else she says, she calls her little siblings fry, small fry. Things like that. And that's what I was telling you earlier, Sophia, about your book. You may consider it like, this just didn't come off right or whatever. Maybe you were in doubt about it, but it makes complete sense when you're reading the story. And it's just, it really highlights your attention to detail. with stuff like that. And even throughout when she has major changes happen to her and she has to live another existence, she can't get rid of her view of being a member of the deep. And I even like how they call it the deep because their whole planet is covered in water. What else is there? And there's a little bit of land formation, but it's, who lives up there, right? Until the deep. And so now you have her world being upended by something she doesn't understand. Now, there's also another part of the story happening here. So after all this calamity, what happens next?
Nica's sister, Rissa, who she was supposed to be in the wedding for, is missing after what they ended up calling the breaking. And they call it the breaking, not just because the surface of the water was broken, but because these huge masses planted themselves in their oceans and actually divided the waters for the first time. I don't know if you know this, but whale songs can travel for miles and miles and miles through the water. And that's the way the Olomi would communicate. If their own personal clicks and vibrations couldn't travel, they would have relays, but they could communicate across the globe through the water. But once these huge monoliths were planted, they blocked the waves of sound that were traveling. And so people no longer had unfettered access to each other. The communication was strangled, and people didn't know if somebody was missing, if they were on the other side of a barrier or if they were dead. And so Nica is determined to find out what happened to her sister. And while she's pursuing that, her father is also, he's the head of the Guardians, and he is mortally injured in a rescue attempt. One of the lava streams causes something to collapse, and so he's burned over almost all of his body, and they don't know if he's going to survive. And so she's devastated. Her mom is devastated, and she wants to try to make things right.
One thing about this, I would definitely call this a young adult story, but it's more than just her falling in love and trying to decide between Billy and Ted. It's about her learning how to survive massive changes. So you have the first massive change being something happened to my world. And when she discovers the magnitude of it, then she goes to investigate. And this is something that a lot of young adults really do. They're curious. And despite the dangers, they're still curious, because how do you learn if you don't express that curiosity? So she goes what they call above water. And so she goes above water. And the moment she goes above water, she is snatched away by something she has never seen before. And so this begins her journey. And we're going to kind of, not necessarily, I don't want to say end it here, but we're going to kind of stop it a little bit right here. This begins her journey because she basically gets, and it's kind of early. I think I can spoil it here. A little early in the story. She basically gets kidnapped by the beings that broke the water. And so that's where her journey really starts to pick up. And what a journey it is. What a journey it is. Now, I want to go into something real quickly, because you have a lot of pseudoscience in here when it comes to these people. And I say pseudoscience because, we've never met one of these people before. Unless we do, we'll know then. But you have a lot of pseudoscience in here. So I want to kind of talk about their anatomy here of creatures who are completely acclimated to the water. But they're also able to go above water too. So they're more amphibian than they are strictly water creatures. To that end, let's talk about how they communicate. You talk about how they communicate, because they communicate through the water, and how when the invaders came, they broke the water. Okay. But then you also talk about how she's able to draw the water inside of her lungs, and she's able to push out certain things because she doesn't want to make, like, she's trying to actually camouflage her feelings and emotions, even her presence, so no one can pick it up, because you can pick up everyone's presence in the water. What were you basing that off? Was it based off any kind of animals here? Was it something you just thought about? How'd you get that idea?
I just started diving in to studying about fish and other animals. And I loved learning about lateral lines. And those are these lines of sensory pores that most fish have. And when you see fish schooling, like in Finding Nemo, when they just all move in the same way, that's them picking up signals from each other. It's a lot like how birds do those murmurations or whatever. But fish have that ability to sense what's going on. And dolphins and whales too, they just are able to sense each other's presence through different ways. And I thought, well, what if these humanoids had sensory pores, and they could read in all those indicators: temperature, heart rate, vibrations of moving around, and they could read each other's reactions. They could read each other's presence, and they would have to learn to work within that if they needed to hide themselves too. So I just kind of dove in, and then I took it in my own direction. They did have amphibian lungs. You know that frogs can breathe through their skin. Mm-hmm. And so they can actually survive if it dries out, but they do best if they are kept humid. And so I was like, ooh, that's a good way to have their lungs work, that they do best when they're hydrated. They can still survive, but it's not as comfortable.
Another thing, too, is that I love how deeply connected they are to the deep. Just like if you were to use a earth example, we're deeply connected to nature on the land. And so I was thinking about how, let's say you're having a bad day and you go for a walk on a lovely spring morning or a lovely spring summer day. And for some reason, you generally speaking tend to feel better because you're surrounded by nature. Just like when they're in the deep, which is the ocean, they feel better. It's much more a part of who they're meant to be because they were creatures made for the water. And looks like we're beings made for the land. And so I love how you have that in this story. Now, one of my favorite characters, Nica is a good character, and I love her too. Don't misunderstand. I love her too. I'm not going to spoil it, but one of my favorite characters is Garak. And I was looking at the end of it, you do have a glossary of terms and how to pronounce things. Now, I am assuming this is all made up. This language is all made up.
Yes. Well, yes and no.
Okay.
Early on, I wanted to have a language that reflected a difference, and I don't know why, honestly, but the thought of Yoruba came to mind.
Oh, okay.
I had heard about it someplace, and so I started digging in, and I discovered that it was a Nigerian language, and I have a couple of friends that are from Nigeria. And I talked to them a little bit, and I said, I want to use Yoruba as the base language for the Olomi. And Olomi actually has a meaning of bearing water in Yoruba. It's really hard, though, because I had no concept of the language when I started. So I kind of bugged my Nigerian friends a lot. So, will this work? Will this work? I found this in Google Translate, but it doesn't seem right. I said, no, that's no good. So
don't use Google Translate.
Yeah, well, I used it as my basis, and then I would run it past my my friends and got their feedback, and then I actually wanted to make sure for the audiobook that it was pronounced correctly, because I'm not saying that the Olomi are Nigerian descendants, but I did want to give respect to the language that I had tapped into. And so I had my friend, we did this whole Zoom recording of all of the phrases, and he would repeat it very patiently over and over, because some of them were much harder than others. And so I was able to give that resource to Oasis, who contracted with the narrator, and she did. Jordan Cobb did such a beautiful job of narrating the story.
Yeah, it does have that Afrocentric feel to the story. There is an Afrocentric feel to it for sure. Even on the cover, she looks of African descent and everything. Even though I really just see her more as a Olomi, which is, amphibian girl.
Amphibian girl, yes.
Yeah, I love it. And there's so much to this story that, dear reader, if we were to actually go even deeper, we would be spoiling it for you. And what I told Sophia offline is that I read this blind, so I did not have the blurb handy or anything. And I will almost just tell you to do it that way yourself. Just read it blind, because as you read it blind, the mystery of the story grows and grows. Then you get the aha moments, you get the sad moments, the bad moments, the crying moments, the hopeful moments. And then toward the last 20 chapters, you're just biting your nails. That's all you're doing. You won't have any more nails after you finish. Get to the chapter, I think 60 on. You're not going to have any more nails, I assure you, because you are just on the edge of your seat. You don't know what's going to happen. And for me, it's more personal because I know authors can be sadistic. I know they can. And they want to get rid of your favorite characters. They want to get rid of the people you've come to like. And they love doing that because the story. And so I was so terrified how she was going to end this. But I think she did a satisfactory, and I'm being very conservative when I say satisfactory. I think she did a wonderful job with this story. So, Sophia, is this a standalone? Is it going to be a trilogy? Is it going to be a whole slew of books? What's going to happen?
Water's Break was signed as a standalone YA science fiction novel, and I agree with you. It does have a complete arc and a satisfying ending. I have written 2 other stories that are part of the well, I'm in the process of it. I have a fuller arc, but those take place far in the future. So there are continuations. You do get to find out what happens to some of the people, which I love. As a reader, I never want a story to end. I want to know, well, what happened then? What happened then? And what about that person? And I love it when I'm reading a story and I realize there's an Easter egg about the original story characters. So I am continuing to work on stories from the deep. And I am praying that I'll be able to get them out there. So you guys, if you're listening and you want that, buy this book up. Share it. Because nothing will make that happen more than good
sales. We all love your support, but we really want to be able to buy coffee tomorrow when you buy our book. So definitely. So dear listener, to that end, make sure you pick up your copy of Water's Break, available on Amazon.com or wherever books are sold. Now, Sophia, I've enjoyed having you on the show today. And this show is always about encouraging the aspiring authors out there whom God has given the gift to write to pick up the pen and do so. So go ahead and encourage that aspiring author out there today.
Hey, first of all, this story came out of a lot of no's and 10 years of writing and revising and learning. So don't give up. You don't have to conquer the mountain of publishing in your first shot. In fact, you probably won't. And if you do, it might not be as good a product as it would be if you learn and learn and learn. Every time I got a no, I turned that into a learning experience. And every negative can be a learning experience for you if you choose to view it that way. Don't let it devastate you. Don't let it turn you off your path. And finally, the first advice I ever got at a writing conference was from Bob Hostetler at Blue Ridge Mountain Christian Writers Conference. And in my first talk that he did, he said, God has planted inside you a story that no one else can write. And that took root. And so I'm going to tell you, God has planted in you a story that no one else can write. So be faithful to it. It might take a long time. You might have to weed a lot and fertilize a lot and dig and trim and prune. But do the work. Don't be afraid of it, because in the end, God will produce something that only He can produce.
I can't think of a better way to end our show today. So, Sophia, thank you so much for being with me on the show. Can't wait to have you back and have you back real soon.
Thanks for having me, Parker. I just love you so much.
And we were talking today to Sophia Henson. She is the author of Waters Break. It is a wonderful tale that I know you're going to enjoy. So make sure you go ahead, love on my sister, and pick up your copy today. I love the thing that she said, dear listener. She said, God has given you a story that only you can write. So what are you waiting for? Go ahead, pick up the pen, and write stuff. Thank you so much for joining me for this edition of The Right Stuff. I'm the Queen, Parker J., and you have a wonderful, absolutely glorious, blessed day.